Thank you for making time to join this conversation. It's an important conversation. It's what we are doing. It's what we think of doing, even in our own projects, in our future endeavors. We're doing funding for startups, and we're so excited to have you here. I'm going to introduce my lovely co-host, Damaris. Karibu sana.
Thank you so much, Vicky. Thank you everyone for making time today. My name is Damaris Kongin, and we bring again a really, really exciting guest. She's really excited to also come share with us her journey and what she's been up to with a very, very cool project she's been working on. So we have the co-founder and CEO of Enda Sportswear. She's also a social entrepreneur, a humanitarian worker, a lawyer, an accountant, a mentor, and a runner in training. Navalayo is leading the Kenyan takeover of the running shoe industry, and she's joining us to speak about funding for startups in Africa, and we're really, really excited to host you. So Navalayo is going to join us on the call, and I'll allow her to introduce herself. So I think the video team can just pin her on the screen as well. So yes, Nava, karibu sana.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. It's a big pleasure to be here. I always like hanging out with entrepreneurs because you guys know the grind. No one else understands it better than entrepreneurs. So whatever I can always do to help, I'm more than happy to, kind of like work with entrepreneurs. My name is Nava. I'm the CEO of Enda. We work with Kenyan athletes to make running shoes, and we are basically saying, Kenya is willing, ready, and able to take its place in the performance footwear industry. So that's what Enda does in a nutshell.
All right. Thank you so much, Nava. We're so excited to have you here. We have been anticipating for this moment for a very long time. And just reading about your story is so inspiring. You are amazing. Your story is very inspirational, and it's just so nice to have you here. And also reading about the products that you have, the shoes that you have, and the names, they really resonate with me, I must say, because I come from those sides. Even my co-host comes from that side, so I'm sure she was also really excited to read about the stories and to see the images. So I just want to take this a little bit to the audience and just I know you all get excited about the renowned brands such as Adidas, Nike, Puma, and so on. But can you imagine now when you're walking into a store and you see a brand that's made from right at home, from right where you come from Kenya? And I don't know, how can you describe that feeling? You can just put it down on the chat, how that feeling would be for you. But Navalayo, what inspired you to take that leap of faith from your well-paying job in the United Nations to become an entrepreneur?
Thanks. Sometimes I also ask myself that question. I don't think you're gonna ever have an answer, because sometimes you're like, wait, did I do the right thing? But I am a firm believer in life being an adventure. Like, I always believe that we can't just be here to eat and to work and to die. And so, from a adventure perspective, I am always looking at, okay, I have X amount of hours on this earth. I don't want to die and get to the end and say, oh my gosh, I should have done this or I should have done that. So that attitude always helps me to, take very risky things. But I also have to say, on the flip side, I do have a very supportive family. So in as much as I am managing risks, there is also a risk hedger, on another side. But I'd say one of the things I always want to do is to maximize my time on earth, if that makes sense. Like, I don't want to have any regrets, and there are instances when I know I will regret not doing something, so I'd rather do it and find out what the consequences are. But of course, do it in a balanced way. You seek advice, you check the risks, you make sure you're hedged a bit, and then you follow it through. That's basically my attitude.
Mm-hmm.
And what would you say was that inspiration for starting Enda? What problem were you really trying to solve at that point?
There were two things that really drove me to work on Enda. First, I was, I knew that I wanted to do something in sports. And this was just mostly because sports is something that really interested me. And I guess that's also something very keen for entrepreneurs. Most of the time, your calling is in something that speaks to you in a way that nothing else speaks to you. And then the other one was I had an experience doing my master's degree. I did international development at a school in London. And when you go to international development, oh my gosh, you are going to hear Africa being bashed in a special way. And so after like a couple of months, I was like, okay, guys, I get we are corrupt, we have diseases, we have everything, but what you guys are experiencing is not the Africa that I know. You know, like I know you can read from a textbook perspective, but I came from Africa. And, you know, it wasn't as miserable as you guys describe. And so one of the things I also remember telling my professor was, that you guys have to look at development also from a happiness perspective, because you guys have developed in one sense, but there's so many miserable people, as opposed to us where, you know, you have a place where you can say people are poor. But I'm like, you know, we played as kids, we had, you know, we made our own toys, we had our own stuff. So I think coming out of that experience after a very intense year of hearing everything negative, I came back home and I was like, okay, let's try to create something positive, you know. And so that was one of the reasons, you know, coming back and saying I want to create something in sports. I actually started as a tennis academy before transitioning to Enda, but I'd say that was one of the key motivators, basically saying, you know what, like we are as good as anyone else in the world and we don't need their validation.
Right. So basically changing the African narrative.
Exactly.
And I think that's really what resonates with most African founders who are really trying to create something out of their passions, out of their talents, out of what they see around their environments. From your background, you really have a rich career profile. You've been an accountant, a lawyer, a risk manager, and you've also been in international development. So how did you end up being so multifaceted? And did it how is it right now helping you in your entrepreneurial journey?
As I said, I've always been interested I've followed my heart in terms of what interests me, right? So for example, the only one I didn't do was accounting because my brother is an accountant. And so one of the things I'm very happy about is back in the day when we finished school, we had to wait 2 years to join university. These kids of nowadays don't understand how privileged they are. So we had to wait 2 years. And so my brother was an accountant and he said, you're going to do your CPAs. And I was like, I don't like, you know, math was not my favorite subject at that point, but he was just like, this is a skill that you need to have. You have 2 years, just go do it. And he basically paid my fees and that's how I found myself as an accountant. So I'd say that was, you know, how I ended into accounts. I always knew I wanted to be a lawyer since I was younger. So I'd applied for law school. I got into law school. And so that's how I transitioned into law school. And then at that particular point, I was hanging out with some auditors who were working at Deloitte at that particular point, you know, and I was like, can I give you my CV, you know? And they're like, sure. So I gave them my CV and they ended up sharing it with their partner. And I was called for an interview at Deloitte for an internship. That's how I entered risk management. You know, she was just like, you know, let's try it. You don't have to know it, but we can teach you how to do it. And so I did risk management for a couple of years. I stayed in Deloitte for a long time until I felt like, you know, it's time to move on. And at that particular point, I felt the need to go to a less established organization, you know, like a startup, you know, and just see what it is. Because I came from a very structured and I wanted to see how do other people do it. So I went into the startup world. I'd say that was my introduction to it. And then after a few months, I was like, you know, it's not necessarily what I was thinking of. Let me go back to law because I did like international humanitarian law. And then I decided to apply for my master's in international development. So that's how I ended up in international development. And then after doing international development, I came home to do now entrepreneurship proper in the sense of the school. And then after that, I got a job to the UN. So I moved. And then afterwards, I was like, okay, it's been nice, you know, let me see what's next. And that's how I ended up. So in summary, I'd say it's mostly been getting to a point where I call it the winds of change, always being aware of when you're, you know, when it's time to move on. I think we all know when it's time to pivot and when it's time to move on. We can ignore it, we can suppress it, but I think it's something God gave all of us. We know when it's time to move on. So I just obey that feeling.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting because even as an entrepreneur, you really have to understand very many things from your financing, from your accounts, from how you run your marketing and things like that. So I think that has really probably helped you in regards to running Enda, right?
Yeah, it has. But I always say you don't have to have those skills. You have friends who
Yeah.
have those skills. So kind of make it a friends with benefits kind of thing. If your friend is a lawyer, use them. If your friend is an accountant, talk to them. You don't have to go with an approach of having to pay for professionals. I think one of the things Kenyans are really good at is helping each other out. So you need certain skill sets. If you don't have them, find friends who have them and they will help you.
Nava, that's such an amazing story. It's so nice to hear from where you came from to where you are right now. I think when we are starting out in life, we usually don't think that this is a place where you will end up, like
Yeah.
at that point, you're usually not very sure why all these things are happening, but all that experience usually gets you to a place where you're meant to be. Like it is preparing you for something that's very specific for you. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So Navalayo, if I have, I have the idea, there's something that has spoken to me and then I'm motivated, definitely. I have talked to myself in the mirror like 1,000 times, and now I have already validated my idea with the market and it's time to start, so especially when it comes to capital, when should you bootstrap and when should you fundraise?
It depends on the business because there's some businesses that you need a lot of money to start. Like for us, it was manufacturing. So no amount of bootstrapping would get us off the ground. We had to have the money to get started. There are some businesses like, IT based or consulting based where you can just kind of like start from your house and stuff like that. So I would say the key thing is to first know your business idea, then put it in a business plan. I think a business plan is essential when you're starting. I debate whether it's important as you go along, but I think when you start, it will help you because you have to go through the idea, the market, it forces you to think about the financials. So that will get you to a perspective of how much money do I need to get this business to start? And you're not looking at a fluffy business. So you can't say, for example, I need an office with office space and furniture. Always start basic. So that will guide you on what you need to do because some businesses are simple. They just need a computer. Others are complex. You need like a whole fleet of, like vehicles or something like that. But the key thing is understanding your cost. I think the key mistakes entrepreneurs make, myself included, is thinking that money is the key to your problems.
It's not.
It's not. In fact, that's one thing I've learned. I'm like, dude, if you don't have processes and if you don't have people, don't even bother getting the money because the money is just going to frustrate you. Either if you're getting debt, you have creditors who are now knocking on your door. If it is, friends or people you borrowed with, people are like, you ran away with my money or things like that. So a lot of times when we start a business, we are always focusing on how much money do I need? And I think it needs to be, what do I need to have in place from a business process perspective to make this work? And when you think about that, it will also help you make a better budget because now you need to factor in an accountant. You need to factor in, like someone to help you do the business process mapping. You need to factor in even a HR, like you think about that, then now you have a comprehensive cost of what it will take to run the business. And so you're more likely to succeed because you've thought about the things that are supporting it's like when you're doing a construction, those metal things that support the actual construction. I'd say that's where your biggest focus should be because money, there's a reason why they call it, one of its properties is liquid. You can't hold liquid. So you'll get the money and you will spend the money. So yeah.
This is so interesting. So amazing. So what I'm getting from you is that you need to know, of course, the type of business that you're going into. A business plan is very important. And also, if you're not prepared in terms of structures and people in place, then just don't think about the money first. Think more of the structure. How is the business going to work, right? Thank you so much, Navalayo. That was awesome.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And of course, Nava, your company has recently led a $1.1 million Series A funding for Enda, and that's according to a press release. And it's definitely going to be part of what helps you guys to take your brand worldwide. So when you look at the statistics of companies or rather startups that are led by females, when you look at the statistics for last year, a very small portion of funding in Africa goes to startups with female CEOs, and that's about 6.5%, and that's in 2021. That represents $1 in every $15 that has been raised. So what do you think, or rather what has been your experience in seeking funding for your company in this current climate?
I'd split that question into two in terms of how to answer it, because I do think there's a reason why there are fewer women entrepreneurs than there are men. And then there's also now the bigger question of funding in this environment. So being an entrepreneur as a woman is difficult. I'm speaking to the woman experience because I am one, but it is also, if I think of where I am, I've moved, how many times? I've moved countless of times, right? And I have two kids, who it means moving is not just packing up and leaving. It means I need to get my husband on board. I need to have my kids move, schools, friends, and stuff like that. So not very women have that flexibility. Not very many women have that flexibility. And it's something I always say when you talk about why are there less women entrepreneurs, I do think the traditional and domestic roles make it much more difficult for women to be in business. And for you to be able to thrive, you need to have a supporting system, for example. Like sometimes my typical day is like 16, 17 hours. If I was in a typical or a different kind of relationship, I think, I would not be where I am. I would have had to make choices, but I'm lucky that I've not been presented with those choices to make. So why women are getting fewer funding is also a factor of there are less women in business. It is also a factor of there are some roles that just make it really difficult for women to be in business. And so I did a TEDx talk about this, talking about why it's important to, empower women from a business perspective. But, sometimes everybody is women empowerment and stuff like that. I'm always like, understand the message. We are not saying about that, we don't have, it's not a competition. It's just basically saying from my experience, this is why it is difficult for women to be in business. So that's the first step. Then the second step is fundraising in this current environment, right? One of the things I've learned is, unfortunately, we do have money in Kenya, but that money would rather sit in real estate or in banks. So it's very difficult to find local investors who are going to be like, yay, let's, build the local economy. Most of them are, like holding that wealth in, assets. And so a lot of the money that is coming in is external money, and which now comes with certain challenges, right? So first of all is the connection challenges. There are expat groups and there are Kenyan groups, and you can be kind of like in between, but from my experience, there are very different circles, and which circle you're in makes it easier or difficult to get money. So it's unfair because nobody tells you these circles exist. You're going to have to find them. The other challenge is the language is very different. Yeah. So for us, if you're fundraising, it's just, here's my balance sheet, here's my income statement. Then from a foreign perspective, they have a different language. They'll ask you, where's your cap table? And I'm like, what's a cap table? Do you have a convertible debt? I'm like, what is that? Do you have a simple agreement for future equity? Terms which it's nothing out of the blues. It's just like saying a zebra is a zebra and someone is saying a zebra is a donkey with stripes, So I find the language, you're talking about the same thing, but the way the language is framed is difficult for local entrepreneurs to be able to plug into that conversation. And it is also difficult to kind of bridge that. So there's more work to be done in terms of kind of like getting into that space where you're able to identify that language. So I'd say it's more difficult from that perspective, and also, knowing where to tap into this conversations about fundraising is difficult. So the chances of an African or a Kenyan local business being able to fundraise from external investors is, you have those challenges. And then now you also have the challenge of the language between the investors and the local person. And then now when you come to the local person, you have the challenge of convincing the local investor that, startups are more practical than real estate. So overall, that makes life very difficult for the African entrepreneur because first, the money is not there, and even if it's there, you have little room for making mistakes because, it's much harder to get the money.
Yeah. And I think as a follow-up to that, of course, when people are seeking to invest, they're looking at your company. They have this checklist of things that you have to make sure you have or that resonates with them before they say yes and give you that check. So what would you say from your end now as an entrepreneur do you look at when you're seeking investors? What kind of investor would you say, okay, now this is the right fit also for my own business?
That's a nice question. I'm smiling because it makes it sound so easy. I'm like, it's not that easy. It's not that easy. But I'd say, one of the things that is critical, which is why I talked about processes in the first place, because, you're a startup, it's a risky world. Mistakes will be made, not may, they will be made. But it's just a matter of how much are you cushioning the mistakes that you're making and can you recover from them quickly. So I'd say from best practice, at least what I've learned is, when you're looking for investors, you're going to probably have a chat with very, very many people. So it's best to just have a folder or like a data room where you have everything, because everybody is going to ask, what's your certificate of incorporation? What's your financials? What's your month to date? Do you have any assets in terms of intellectual property? Like, think in advance of what the investor wants and just put it together. So all you just have to do is share a link. But ultimately, you also want to be able to, again, you don't feel the pressure of showing a perfect business because it doesn't exist. Like, I can tell you for free, it doesn't. So don't feel like your numbers have to get to this point. Don't certainly pad your numbers in terms of trying to, create a picture that is not there, but just present, because the investor is buying into the opportunity and the future. So don't basically overrule yourself and say, everything sucks right now, I should probably not do it. Just do it anyway, because with their help, you should be able to now get to that point where, you can work together. And I'd say, when kind of like looking for investors, it's also great to have people who are aligned in terms of mission, and also people who can help you other than just give you money. As I've mentioned, money is liquid, it will come and it will go. It is a guarantee, And so you basically want to be able to make sure that, even if the money is, you're kind of like in a tight crunch or situation, you can still talk to that investor and they can help you from a knowledge or technical perspective so that you don't have necessarily to pay for that service. So the investor match is pretty much critical as well, just to ensure that you have people who can help you in the journey, and emphasis being it's a journey. So I'm always like, there's no perfect thing. There's going to be good days and there's going to be bad days. That is the standard entrepreneurship template. So you're just looking for people to go on that journey with. Yeah.
Navalayo, that's amazing. It's just basically you're saying it's all about relationships before anything else. Like, how are you relating with your investor or with the people who are funding for you? So that's very important. So
and also alignment.
And also alignment, yes.
Yeah.
All right. So Navalayo, I'm really glad you're talking about structures more and more, because my next question is actually leading you to those structures. So now you have funding, you've gotten the money. What kind of structures should you put in place to make sure your business is scaling, or rather at least not losing ground? You're gaining ground, or you're staying on ground. So what kind of structures can you put in place for that to happen?
So I'll go back to my first comment. I think you need to think about the structures when you're starting the business. So that will help you in your business plan. And then now you need to think about the structures as you scale the business, And so one of the things that I'm grateful for, at least for my experience at Deloitte, was learning about internal controls. So internal controls and risk management is just looking at a process and saying, okay, let's say The process is getting stuff to inventory from the truck to the store, so you document it and say, the person comes to the door with this document, and then they make me sign it, and then I count the things, and then we put them in the store. Okay, so you document it. Then you ask, what could go wrong, right? So, okay, maybe this person, doesn't give me the correct documents. Maybe there's a collusion between my store person and the delivery guy. So you think about all those things, and then you say, okay, how can I make processes to make sure that we're alleviating that risk? And so I would say, really emphasize that these are things you need to think about before you get the money. Again, kind of saying we are all entrepreneurs looking for money, but I'm here to tell you, money is not what you need, at least not until you've kind of like set the structures, because the good thing about money is that you can spend it really quickly. So in terms of, okay, now to go to your question of, okay, now you cannot have the money, you need to make sure. I'd say having a vision or a goal is extremely important, because when you have money, everybody has ideas to implement all of a sudden. All those wish lists you had, all of a sudden you have the ability to do them and you have the money to do them, but you did not do a risk analysis for them. You did not think about it through. So you are just excited, if I would say that. And so the key thing of having a vision and a mission is it gives you the right to say no to things that look nice, sound nice, but are not what you need to do, right? And it's usually very, very hard to say no. But if you know the vision and the journey or where you're going, if, for example, I'm getting on a matatu going to Karen, there's no point going to a matatu that's going to Parkland. I'm like, yeah, it's nice to go, but it's not where I'm going. So thanks, but no thanks. So I'd say having a vision is very critical to determining how you spend the money. And then secondly, it's also having a really good team. And a team, again, everybody comes with their strengths and weaknesses, but there is no entrepreneur who's an all-star. Even the NBA all-star games have all-stars working together, So there's no one, superstar who's kind of like doing it. And so you as the entrepreneur, you need a good team. And the thing I've learned about teams is that I would say, I used to think finance was the most important role. I'd say HR is. Now I've changed my mind. HR is the gateway through which people come into your company. So if it's a bad apple, too bad. You have to deal with the bad apple. If it's a good find, it's a good find. And so you have to spend a lot of time looking at the job description and who is coming in and what they're going to do and what's their expectations, how you're going to measure their performance. It's the kind of stuff that I don't like doing as an entrepreneur because it's not exciting. But if you don't do that, you're going to spend a lot of time trying to recover, and also trying to recover from bad decisions, essentially. Because as I said, you have to trust the system to expand, and not at this particular point you're expanding with, significant resources. So the likelihood of the wrong people making mistakes is really high. So I'd say you kind of want to make sure you have a really good team. And that also comes with the courage to let people go sometimes if they're not a right fit for the company. My dad was in the army. He always used to say there's two kinds of soldiers. There's the barrack soldier and there's the forefront soldier. And so in as much as the government keeps the soldiers in the barracks, the soldiers are being kept there in the event of war. That is their job. Their job is to stay in the barracks. And so he always says, when you're working with a team, do you have generals for war or do you have generals for barracks? Because the general for war, you're like, okay, we need more ammunition. We need this. Like, you don't even have to tell them. Everybody's on the front line. The guy for the barracks will be like, maybe let me go call someone who can do it and stuff like that. They're still generals, but you don't have the right ones with you. And so when you're scaling, you need to have guys who are going to be with you on the front line and guys who you can, work with. And I'd say the team is the most important thing, and then the processes. So processes is just a governance perspective, and this not just extends to the team, but to the entrepreneur themselves. Are you just going to get money from investors and the next thing you're buying a Mercedes? We're like, oh, this is the new entrepreneur in town. Are you going to be the person who all of a sudden you're like, my salary is, it was 2,000, now it's 50,000 and kind of thing. Like, you have to also have those controls. And now that's where the issue of governance comes in. You have the board, which, even as an entrepreneur, you need to have someone you report to because you're not all knowing. You need to have someone who can guide you or tell you, like, this is not the way to go. A lot of us usually don't like that. It's not a nice process to be chastised, but I think that governance helps to keep people in line, and it also helps you to lead by example, so that when you're basically saying only this person can access the bank account in addition to this person and that person, you're putting in place the structures to make sure that you are safeguarding the resources for yourself and for your investors and building towards the future of what you want to achieve, your vision essentially.
There's so many things to recap from your talk. I don't even know where to start, but I'll start from where I can remember. The first thing is, like you said, having things having a structure before you get the money is very important. It's like everything in life, literally.
Yeah.
Even before you get a husband or boyfriend, you need to have those checklists. Even before you get a house, even before you get a car, there's a checklist. And it's so true.
Yeah.
Because if you get into one before you have a checklist, then you are going to be in trouble. You've talked about the hiring process, which is very important, especially when you're starting out. You need people who are going to be there, who are going to be soldiers at the forefront with you, and also having the courage to say no. And I know Damaris will also continue with many points from this, but for the audience, if you have any questions, please let us know. Please ask Nava. She is here. She's so resourceful with information. So please ask her. Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, investing in the right team, finding the right people to get on your bus. I think that's also a really, really good point. So Nava, I know that you really make time to talk to entrepreneurs, similarly to what you're doing right now. And one thing that you say that I really, really like is that global brands can be born in Africa.
Yeah.
So, and that's what you're doing with Enda right now. So how did you get to that mindset of not just thinking locally to globally? Like, it's not just a thing you're doing for your home, but you can scale it and people can buy your brands from internationally. So let's start with that first before I go to how the experience has been with trying to set up Enda internationally.
Yeah, so I'd say one of the things I really like is history. I always say, as a generation, we owe ourselves to know our history and we need to understand our place in the world. And that's why, for me, international development was really strong in terms of an influence for me. And when you read history, it's really sad when you see how Africa has, kind of like progressed over the last couple of years. And, when you read about the transatlantic slave trade, for example, you see how guys were, throwing themselves overboard. They'd rather die than go into slavery. When you read about the Congo and how people's hands were being cut off just so that, this guy who was already rich could get richer. When you read about the issues going on in Libya and, migrants being left to die in the ocean, I'm like, these things sit heavy with me because I'm always like, guys, in the backdrop of all these things, we are the richest continent, not just in terms of resources, in terms of talent, in terms of market, in terms of youth. Yeah. So I'm always like, we have to understand that building Africa is a duty. It's not a luxury, it's a duty, because we can't have the same generations that are coming after us to go through the challenges we are going. We can't have our grandchildren thinking, where am I going to get money to start a business? They should be able to go to an institution where we give them loans at interest-free rates and stuff like that. And it's possible. And so for me, when I think about the place of Africa globally, and I again have to say international development played a really key role of me understanding the hierarchy of the world, how it works, and how just knowing how it works makes me feel like we don't always have to be the recipients of that kind of stuff. Like, we can change it. And so when I look at how to fix Africa, I know that we have to do it, unfortunately, in the framework that we find. And in this framework, it's about trade, right? It's about, this is how people make money, by going, adding value, extracting value, and selling. And so to be able to do that, then as Africans, we hopefully in future, I don't know, like, we can organize ourselves in such a way that we can participate in global trade. And participating in global trade makes us, we have to think of, not just saying, okay, I'm going to build a business that's going to be in all of Nakuru. Why not think of businesses that can be for Kenya, for East Africa? And if you look at a lot of the international brands, they never create brands to serve a small area. Somehow, maybe they're smaller businesses, but for most of them, when they start Facebook, for example, Facebook was a global brand. Uber is a global brand. KFC is a global brand. So it's the same thing. I was like, so why can't we do that as well? So that as entrepreneurs, when you're thinking of setting up your apparel shop, it is, don't just think about your area. Think, how do I get this to be global? And the beauty of nowadays is that we have the internet. So a lot of the challenges our grandfathers had, we don't have that. You can access a customer in Malaysia just as they can access a customer in Kenya, and vice versa. And so when you think about that, I don't think we have any option but to think of how we are either plugging into the global economy, either as sellers or as producers or somewhere in the supply chain, but we have to think about that. We're already doing it on a government perspective, so things like tea, coffee, and stuff like that. But the challenge then is the value addition. You have to look at your business from what value do you create and what value do you capture. So if I use the example of the tea farmers, they are the ones who suffer, they grow the crop, but do they capture the value? They don't. Some other guy who doesn't even know about farming makes the money. And so my prompt is always to entrepreneurs, and you look and you say, this is my value chain. I am creating value. There are many people who are benefiting from me. How do I maximize what I am benefiting for myself and for other people? So in summary, I just feel like we have to challenge ourselves to think bigger, because the tools are there to help us to think bigger.
That's really, really a cool way of thinking about it. And I know when you want to now get to that point where you're taking your brand global, there are factors you need to start thinking about. What are some of those things you've had to go over for Enda? Thinking about which markets to target first, where would your brand do well? Because of course, global is global. So where to start?
Yeah, so I'd also give an example that I do know other smaller businesses that are global, not to the scale of Enda, but I'm hoping they get to that scale. So to be able to start, I think what we were lucky in was that the way we raised money helped us to become a global business from the beginning. So we raised money through crowdfunding, and that's how we ended up getting customers from around the world, and that helped us to be there. But I see other businesses that have started the other way around, where they start in Kenya, in Rwanda as well, and they grow. So the key thing is to think about the journey in terms of how you deliver your goods or services. If it's something like software, that's relatively easy. If it's a product, you have to think of how do you source it? How do you have it, like in your warehouse? How do you move it? And sometimes you may not even have it in the warehouse. So I'd say the supply chain, how you're getting stuff, you need to figure that out. And how you're selling stuff, you need to figure that out as well. Because if you're selling to a global, if you're selling globally, then your supply chain, I always say, you know how our fundis are. For the benefit of those who don't know fundis, they're like, the tailors or someone who's coming to do a small job in your house or for you, or, like they're creating something. It's very common in Kenya. So there's always today I'll be done. No, I'll do it tomorrow. Oh, no, next week. No, if you come, and then another day they're not picking up your phone calls. And then when they're ready, they give it to you when they want. And so when you think about how you're going to be global, you realize you can't work with the fundi system, because if a customer says, I want my shoe or I want my product on this particular date, they want the product on this particular date. Yes, there'll be challenges to get there, but that already makes you think, am I ready, with my fundi supply chain system to supply globally? Then you can focus on how to fix it. On the other hand, you want to sell globally. Then you have to start thinking about, do I have a website? Do I have Instagram? Have I configured Google Ads and Google Analytics? So when you think that way, it basically helps you.
Right. And I'm glad that we already have a follow-up question in that regard from an audience, from someone from the audience. And I'll just pin it for everyone to see so that it's much more comprehensible. So Clinton is asking, how has globalization changed the labor market? Don't the best talent now have access to opportunities abroad, even from the comfort of their homes? So then how do local startups compete for talent with those abroad?
I would say actually see it as the opposite. Because of gig economy, you can get a guy in India to do something the same way as you can get a guy in US and in Europe. And so that competitiveness, if you look at things like, I feel like there's so many websites and places where you can find someone for the hour or for the job or for the project. So I feel like globalization has actually made it better so that you can find that talent, and because of the competition, you can find it at a fraction of the cost.
All right. So I'm actually seeing there's another question. Ranson is asking, how does crowdfunding work?
Crowdfunding is a lot of work. There's, I think there's a post we wrote about it. To summarize, I'll try to find it and put it in the chat. But essentially, I always say, think of crowdfunding as Harambe that is online and on steroids. That's it, basically. Because we know Harambes, when we're in trouble, we call our families and our friends to help us. It's the same thing. You're starting a business, you call your friends and family to help you, but instead of just giving you money, you are pre-selling the product and basically saying, I have this bottle, for example, and I've already built a sample. If you guys buy it in advance, I'll give you like a 50% discount or something like that. If you have sufficient people to believe in your dream, you raise money that way. So in a very simple nutshell, that's how it works. But from a preparation perspective, I'd say it takes like about 4 to 6 months to have a successful campaign. But it's the same thing. I always try to simplify it. When you think of a Harambe, you make a list of who you're going to invite, how much they're likely to give you, call them up, give them all these incentives. So it's the same way. And what I always say about crowdfunding, it's not a new phenomenon. It's just that we call it crowdfunding. So it sounds very technical. It is literally a Harambe for a business. And instead of people just contributing, that some can contribute, but they can also buy products in advance.
Right. Just like we were talking about investors, international investors and local investors. The same words you're using with the local investors is not the same words you use with the other international investors. They want to hear big words, or rather, not big words necessarily, just words that are strange to you. But that's what they expect. Yeah,
it's the same thing, but just a different language.
Exactly. And with crowdfunding, does that mean that when, for example, I have friends and family who are helping me to give me money, crowdfunding, does that also involve asking your friend to ask a friend to give you money? Is that also part of it?
It is because sorry, I'll look for this and send it later. It's basically the same thing as a Harambe. You ask your friends to come with their friends. It's the same thing. You make a list. I remember when we were making my list, I even reached out to someone that, I last spoke to in kindergarten, but I know somehow I had their contacts, so a successful Harambe is about a successful crowd, and a crowd that's coming to commit. It's the same thing. You're basically making a list of everyone you know. And one of the things I've learned is a lot of our fears are just internal. We're like, oh my gosh, they'll think I'm begging them, or they'll think I'm doing this. It's fine if they think that way. They're the same guys are going to be so happy for you when you make it. But just ask. The worst thing you can get is a no, and a no just takes you to where you were in the first place, which is, where you were. But if you ask, and you will be very surprised just how you may not have kept in touch with someone for years, but they actually listen to you again. They're like, this is fantastic. They're like, I'm willing to help you. So the thing I've learned about entrepreneurship is at some point, just get out of your head and ask.
Yeah.
It makes you a professional beggar, basically.
Yeah. Not a beggar. And I think this is what we need to change from an entrepreneurship perspective. You're not begging, you are that's how you build, basically. Yeah, I think we've become, nowadays it's hard to ask, but business is relationships. If you're not willing to ask, it's gonna be very hard to build your business.
Yeah. So Navalayo, I'll just go straight to at least the second last question. So Navalayo, I know that you're very, very passionate about the society, and your company is not just for profit, but it's also to help people around you and in Kenya and also globally. And you started a sports academy to provide the sport proteges from disadvantaged backgrounds to access their much needed training, but without compromising their education. So I just wanted to ask you, where did this passion come from? And yeah, I know it's sports because you love sports, but where did it come from to help people and not just to be rich and get that seat, like you said?
It comes from different places. One, as I said, being a student of history, if you look at African traditional society, we cared for each other. We did. We might have had tribal differences, but in between, the extended family was the family. And so it is in our nature and it is in our DNA to actually care about each other. And I think that's one of the things that, we need to go back to. And then the other thing is really, I don't come from a family that had much. And I believe that if I had access to opportunities, I would be the president or even like the UN Secretary General or something. But I feel like a lot of these opportunities, I had to struggle to get to them, or I had to wait longer than other people who had access to stuff. And I'm like, it doesn't have to be that way. Because if you are in a meritocracy, if you have a system that rewards merit, I think that's part of also what it takes to create a successful Africa. You can't have to have a reason where people who really want it are in positions where they can really make change, as opposed to, here's my nephew or my niece and they are so happy, rolling with a job and not doing anything. And so I genuinely believe that financial hardship should not lock out anyone, because I'm always like, there's so many, I'm like, I genuinely believe there's so many solutions, but those solutions are limited by lack of fees or lack of opportunity or lack of exposure. Same going with, we had the Kenyan tennis star Angela, and I was kind of like reading her story, and I'm like, imagine if she had access to state of the art, despite her humble beginnings. So the reason why I'm so passionate is because I think building Africa has different, facets of it, but one of it has to be giving access to people, because people are smart, but we cannot limit them based on who they know and what they have, because when we do that, we've already lost, and you already have such a big battle to fight that putting those obstacles in front of people who have the ability to change the world is not just unfair, but it's a disservice to ourselves.
That's amazing, Navalayo. I know most of us are thinking in Kenya, it's about who you know. We all grow up being told that. So yeah.
Nice. I think it's changing. And that's why I also like sports. It's about your effort as well. And so I genuinely believe that things are there, but it's a little bit harder, but it's possible.
Yeah. Thank you, Navalayo.
Okay. You're welcome. I can see we have run out of time. I feel like this conversation has been shorter than I expected. 1 hour can really be short when you're having such an amazing conversation. I think we were to talk about funding for startups in Africa, and I'm sure we could not be able to cover it all in 1 hour. But there is more that you can go check out from Navalayo. She has a newsletter known as Twende Pamoja on LinkedIn. We're going to drop the link here as well, so you can go catch up on that. And where you can also go check out what she's building, Enda Sports, where we're also going to leave a link here. And you can also see a snippet of how Enda shoes look like. I think someone from our video team can just pin that on the screen here as well. So you can see Nava, what she's been able to create in the period that she's been building Enda. Eric, is that ready, or should we just conclude? Is that good to go? Okay. I think we are unable to get that, but you can check from the link that has been shared. Okay.
Yes, so I can just add a few things. So one, I've put a link to the article we wrote about how to run a successful Kickstarter campaign. So that is on the chat. And then I'd say, just to wrap up, because people are talking about funding and fundraising, I'd say in a hierarchy perspective, in summary, there's savings. Savings usually depends on the business that you want and the type. And then there's friends and family. So this is, the people who you can convince. And then there's angel investors. These are, high net worth individuals who have some spare money to put. And then after that, now you can enter the world of, investment. What do you call this? impact funds or VCs. So there's a hierarchy of different ways that you can get the money. And of course, competitions. Competitions are actually very good sources of funding as well.
Okay, so that's a lot to also go check up on if you really want to learn more about it. Thank you so much, Nava, for making time. And also, if you would like to join our community, the Power to Women community, and keep in touch with us and learn about more events that we have, a link will be in the chat where you can sign up for the PTOW LinkedIn group. Okay, so I'll just let the video team do their thing.
Before you finish, Dama, there's also a question, Nava, from Florence. She's saying, how can you let them know about future opportunities for mentorship? So I think maybe how can people reach you, Nava, to ask more questions and such?
Yeah, sometimes time is a limit, so you can bear with me if I take too long to respond, but you can send me a message on LinkedIn, or I do have a website that I try to summarize. I've not updated it in a while, but it also has, I find it easier than having one-on-ones, just because time is a factor. But I also try to, there's navalayosembo.com. I try to summarize a lot of the learnings. It's outdated, but that's where I would put that, and also on LinkedIn.
Thank you, Navalayo. And thank you for coming today.
Thanks for having me.